Welcome, everybody. Today we have with us Dr. Claudia Welch, which is very exciting. Dr. Claudia Welch is a Ayurvedic practitioner, a doctor of Oriental medicine, and an educator who specializes in women's health. She's also the author of several books, including Balance Your Hormones, Balance Your Life, Chinese Medicine and Western Science, and How the Art of Medicine Makes Science More Effective. Dr. Welch leads lectures internationally on Oriental and Ayurvedic medicines and women's health. She has been on the teaching faculty of the Ayurvedic Institute, the Kripalu School of Ayurveda, Southwest Acupuncture College, acupractice seminars, and has taught in many other locations as well. So thank you, Claudia, for being here with us today.
My pleasure, John. Hi, everybody.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to have you. Claudia, one of the questions that is on my mind always when I meet with a client that has digestive health issues, and at Joyful Belly we focus a lot on digestive health, and as you know, we even run a program teaching other practitioners about digestive health. Given that you're an expert on hormones, can you tell us a little bit about how hormones, and specifically a woman's menstrual cycle, might affect digestion?
Sure. Well, I think that there's two big classes of hormones we want to look at in a woman's body. One is sex hormones, which govern the cycle, and the other, and the other is stress hormones. And you're not going to have a smooth cycle necessarily if you have stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol. That, for the purposes today, I think adrenaline and cortisol are the more important ones. So, in terms of the hormones that govern the menstrual cycle and how that affects digestion, I don't actually think that that's as much of a problem as what the stress hormones are doing to the digestion as well as the menstrual cycle. So I think it might be more appropriate to talk about what the stress hormones are doing to digestion as well as a woman's cycle. Is that all right with you?
Yes. Yeah. I'm interested.
All right, because the thing is that the progesterone and estrogen, which are the main players in a woman's cycle, if they're working normally, that shouldn't have an effect on digestion. It shouldn't have a negative effect on digestion. The only thing that you'll find with that is that when apanavayu, this sort of natural downward moving energy in the body, when that kicks in for a woman's menstrual cycle to start, it might kick in when apanavayu kicks in, then that might kick in an urge for a bowel movement or something like that, or maybe a looser bowel movement. But other than that, with all things going smoothly, it's not going to interfere with digestion. What's going to interfere with digestion more is stress hormones. And one of the things I think, and you've probably talked about this because it's a really important thing, but sometimes I get tired of the food conversation because the food conversation is so overwhelmingly tempting. It's so seductive for us to think that, oh, my digestive problems are going to be fixed by changing my diet, which is true very often. It's not that that's not true, but it can't possibly be the be all and the end all, because I often talk about if you had all the top Ayurvedic physicians and all the top Chinese physicians and all the top Western physicians all get together, come to your house and sit and interview you for as long as you felt you needed to be interviewed about all of your health issues and your digestive issues and your whole picture, and they all miraculously agreed on what your constitution was and what your current condition was, what's your prakriti and your vikriti, what's your imbalance, and they all agreed, and then they all agreed on what perfect diet you should be eating, and then you had someone who loves gardening, if it's not yourself, grow an incredible organic garden in the backyard, and then you had someone pick it with love and mantras and make food with love and mantras and serve you with love and mantras. You will still not digest it if you're in fight or flight mode. If you're stressed out, you're still not going to digest that. And So what's happening, I see over and over, is people going from one diet to another and one physician to another, trying to get their diet appropriate in order to fix their digestion, when their life is stressful. And looking at the context of the life is really the deeper issue. You know, and we can understand that in a pretty simple way if we understand what happens with stress hormones. So can we talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So, you know, like, stress hormones aren't bad. In fact, our body absolutely prioritizes stress hormones. Because why? Because it prioritizes survival over reproduction, over digestion of food. It's the most important thing. In order to reproduce, we need to survive. In order to have good digestion, in order to feed our tissues the nutrients that they need and take away the waste they need, we need to survive first and foremost. So our body prioritizes survival over everything else. And what are the survival hormones? The stress hormones. Because this is an old system. This is a really old system. So, you know, people talk about this a lot. What happens, you know, when the tiger jumps out and you've got to run away from the tiger, adrenaline and cortisol kick up. They kick the body into high gear. They immediately mobilize. One of the ways I've really been fond of thinking about cortisol lately, and adrenaline too for that matter, is their role as allocators of energy and resources in the body. So when they come up, what do? They reallocate our resources to our extremities, to the biceps so we can fight, and to the quads so we can flight, so we can run, and we can really mobilize the muscles in our body to be strong and fast, and our heart rates go up so that they can get that done. So I find that to be interesting on a number of levels, physical and energetic levels both, in that what's happening there is our prana and our life force, our prana and our blood, our tissues, they are prioritizing our extremities. We start to live in our extremities when we have stress. And what's happening there is prana is getting robbed from the vital organs, aside from the heart, which is getting plenty of prana so that it can kind of pump the blood through and get it to where it needs to go. The digestive system is robbed of these nutrients and this prana, and the reproductive system is robbed of these nutrients and prana. So the second that the tiger jumps out, you're about as inclined to want to sit down and eat a lovely meal and digest that as you are interested in foreplay. Tiger jumps out, you're not interested in foreplay. You know, I have so many people say, oh, my libido is low. What can you give me to bring my libido up? And, you know, and they want some kind of hot herb like ginseng, or they want some ashwagandha, or they want some herb in order to get the libido up, where that's not the problem at all. The problem is that there's stress. And so the vital organs are being robbed of nutrients and nourishment in favor of the fight or flight response. And so, you know, that worked really well, and we really needed that. And what happens with that adrenaline and cortisol, by the way, is, why do we have two things that do the same thing? Because they both do really similar things in the body. But when that tiger jumps out, they both rise immediately. Adrenaline will pass and subside as the threat subsides, but cortisol will stick around in the body for a day or two. So that's really helpful. Because why? Because the threat is past, the tiger's left, but you need to be on alert for a couple days because the tiger could still be in the neighborhood, right? But when we transplant that ancient evolution that has affected our systems into the current day, what we get is, we wake up and we look at our email and we go, oh, I have 20 emails, and we get out to the car, and we get in the car, and we pull out, and the car pulls out in front of us, and we go, and then the danger is past. But 20 times a day we're going, and every time we go, the adrenaline and cortisol rise. Adrenaline might pass as the time goes on, but cortisol is staying up for a day or two. If this is happening once every 2 days, your cortisol levels are constantly up a little bit. Forget about 20 times a day. So what we're doing is we're literally irrigating our organs and our tissues with adrenaline and cortisol, and the general nature of adrenaline and cortisol is very, what we call in Ayurveda, lungana, or what you call in Chinese medicine, yang, very stimulating, motivating, heating, drying, and lightening to the tissues. So when we have enough of that, since it's so stimulating, it stimulates the nervous system to be on alert. When the nervous system is on alert, then we start more often translating benign events as threats to us and seeing them as threats. They're not, but we start mistakenly perceiving them as threats, and then we get more jacked up, and it's this catch-22. We kind of get into this downward spiral. So the more our systems are irrigated with stress hormones, the more likely we are to perceive benign events as threats, which increase our stress hormone levels even further. And then what we're doing is we're prioritizing our extremities, our legs and our arms. And they are getting the resources, and we can't digest food. We can't digest emotions. We can't digest anything with our guts at that point, right? So the libido goes down, the sex hormones get thrown off, and the digestion suffers enormously. And then we go from doctor to doctor and diet to diet, and we get more stressed out because none of those things work, and we think, oh, none of this works. Ayurveda doesn't work. I've been eating this vata-reducing diet and it doesn't work. But it's a bigger issue, right? It's a bigger issue.
Yeah. Okay. So that's great. This idea that cortisol is sticking around for a while. I think a lot of folks don't know that. They know that they feel the rush of adrenaline, and then they think 2 hours later that they've recovered from that. But what I'm hearing is that, in fact, they have not recovered from that, and they won't recover until they take a significant period of rest. They got to wait for the weekend and get those two full days off if they're not doing projects around the house all weekend, to get that level of relaxation that our body demands.
Let's back up there a minute, because we are so deprived, and I'm going to speak more about women for a moment here, which is
please do.
Which is that if we look at the difference between men and women, there's some really interesting differences there, and I have a favorite way of summarizing that in my head these days, and then so let me just say that, and then I'll talk around that a little bit, and then talk about resting for the weekend. Don't let me forget about that, okay?
Okay.
But one of my favorite ways to look at the difference between men and women right now is something that I came to through what happens with the hormones and the nature of testosterone, which is a major. Both men and women have testosterone, but men have a lot more of it. And women have estrogen and progesterone. Men do too, but a lot less of it. So the nature of these hormones has got to drive what our natures are to some degree. And one of the things when we look at these two categories for women of stress hormones versus sex hormones, we find that those stress hormones, as I mentioned before, are highly lungana, highly yang, highly motivating and stimulating and reducing and lightening, right? Mm-hmm. And heating and drying to the tissues. Whereas the sex hormones are highly brahmana, highly yin, highly nourishing and grounding and calming. And so that has to be at a nice balance. And women need enough of those, of enough nourishment and calming and yin grounding kind of experiences and food and rest in life in order for that yang to come up, that energy and that motivation in life to come up. So it's like we get to motivation through rest. If we have enough rest, women, if we have enough rest, enough nourishment, enough grounding, then we kind of can come out of that to a place of activity that feels natural, whether that activity is libido or exercise or doing a project or creating something. That has to come from a place of resting. And so on that side, that's what's going on with women. And I, for years, was really confused about how this would work, because I've seen hormones fall into this category over and over again of either being more yin, more grounding, more calming, more nourishing, or being more yang, more stimulating, more motivating, more activating. But testosterone was kind of an interesting one to me because it's both. it's stimulating and activating, and it's a driving hormone. It's a very driven hormone. When testosterone is up, you're driven to change something, conquer something, do something. And whether that's a business transaction or sex or whatever it is, you get really driven to change, do, act. And there's this mass building aspect to testosterone where men will take testosterone, go to the gym, work out, and get muscles. And I thought, what is that mass building aspect of it? And then I realized, in Chinese medicine we talk about, and in Ayurveda we talk about this dual dynamic with Langana and Brahmana, this, or Santarpana, Apatarpana, yin-yang balance, this language of duality. And we, and it's a really strong core principle of Ayurveda. Same in Chinese medicine. And in Chinese medicine they give a couple laws about how those two things interact. And one of the things is at extremes, one changes to the other. So at extremes, yin will change to yang, or yang will change to yin. And what happens is with testosterone is you don't just take testosterone with this mass building aspect of testosterone. You don't just take it and your muscles build. You have to go work out. You have to go and get active in order for mass to build. And that was the clincher for me. And so what that says about that hormone is that it builds mass through activity. It finds its nourishment through action. So exactly the opposite for women. So if we were to boil that down to a pithy little take-home message, it would be that women arrive at activity through rest, and men arrive at rest and rejuvenation through activity, as a broad general rule. This is so important sometimes to keep in mind for the different genders, because otherwise, what I found in the beginning of my marriage, for example, is my husband and I would have, we had a long week at work and we were busy, both tired and both busy all week, and then he would want to go off and act like a human bullet, strap a helmet to his head and lie down face first on a sled and go shooting down a hill. And I wanted to take a nap. And, and judging his actions by my needs was wrong, because I would think what he really needs is rest, and he's going out and being so active, that's going to deplete him. No, that's going to deplete me. What I had to learn was this piece with men and women, that if he goes out and he is active and having a good time and having a blast and working his muscles, he gets rejuvenated through that in a way that I wouldn't. I would get depleted. And I need to rest, and he needs to recognize I need to rest and not go out and socialize and not go out and be active for a little while until the natural inclination to activity comes up. So got that?
I got it. Fascinating.
So I bring that in because of the weekend thing, because when you're saying, okay, now you gotta rest on the weekend, I want to say that women have a guilt in general. We have a guilt response to rest. Like, we may have evolved to have a healthy relationship with food and drink, where we say, gosh, I'm hungry, I'll feed myself some good healthy food. Gosh, I'm thirsty, I'll drink some, something that's good for me. Gosh, I'm tired, what's wrong with me? That's where we go.
Yeah.
And then we feel guilty. We're tired. First of all, we feel like something's wrong. We must have cancer or heart disease or something brewing.
Hypothyroid. Terrorizing women everywhere.
Oh yeah, and it is. And it is. And we can talk about why that is in a minute, but if you want. Or why I believe it is happening anyway. It's an epidemic. But for us, we are embarrassed to rest. And if we lay down on the couch, because we need time, it's so embarrassing to do that. It's like the hidden cameras are all around, trained on us, like, wow, you're not being productive, and we're noticing this, we're watching you. And who's put those hidden cameras up there? Is it society? Is it net? It's us. We've got them up there. We're feeling guilty. We're so guilty about lying on the couch that, if you were to come in and I was lying on the couch, I'd have to reach for a magazine and or a book and make it look like I was reading something important or doing something important. I had some kind of excuse to be resting. or be lying there. And I wasn't in fact resting. I'm doing something productive. And that guilt response is driving women into the ground and driving their digestions into the ground in my experience, because we're not resting what we need as much as we need. And that has built a backlog of need such that a weekend can't touch it. We often will need like 6 months on the couch, and a weekend, the only guilt we should be feeling is that we're not resting enough. But let's not go even to a guilt place. Let's learn how to appreciate rest. When I was first studying, I studied Ayurveda pretty extensively and Chinese medicine pretty extensively, and none of them gave me a real understanding of hormones. It wasn't until I got out of training and into practice and having woman after woman come in the door with hormonal issues that I started to really think, okay, I gotta get my head around this hormonal thing more. And so I went and really studied as much in depth as I could about Western understanding of hormones, because that's where the understanding is. Hormones is a new conversation. They only discovered the first hormone in 1902. This is a new conversation. And it's mostly been in Western medicine. So I studied it and I studied it and I studied it, and it was like so overwhelming, and all the different, what they show in Western medicine. This is this hormone, this is where it's secreted, this is where it goes, this is the action it makes. And so it does that for each hormone, and it just starts feeling like a bunch of contradictory information and overwhelming. But if I looked at it and looked at it and looked at it, and John, those pictures that have some kind of repeated pattern in it, and if you look at it long enough, you're supposed to be able to see like a ship emerge.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and you look at it, you don't see the ship, you don't see, and then finally you see the ship and you can't not see the ship, right?
Yeah, once you see it, you're like,
Right, so it was like that. So I looked at all this information, I was like looking at that repeated pattern over and over, and finally I saw the ship, and I was like, oh my God, it can't be that easy. It can't be that simple. And I went back to the drawing board, looked at it all over again from this perspective, and it was that simple. And the perspective is duality. The perspective is yin-yang. Santarpana, Patarpana, Brahmana, Langana. This language that Eastern medicine has chosen to delineate opposites and what those opposites are. On one hand, stimulating, motivating, lightening, and on the other hand, grounding and nourishing and calming and cooling. So we have this balance in everything, and for women, we're really out of balance. Our whole culture seems to be in a love affair with the yang qualities, the more traditionally masculine qualities of ambition and drive, and we're almost embarrassed about the yin qualities, the rest and the nourishment and the calming. And so if we can get that more of that rest and that nourishment and that calming, and we can break that cycle of the nervous system being on high alert all the time, then we might have a shot at digesting food. Then it's a question of what are you eating. But that hormone interaction in terms of digestion is overlooked regularly, and I think maybe because it's easier to take a pill or change your diet than it is to change your life.
Yeah, absolutely it is, and it's easier to it's very hard to change these underlying belief systems, that are driving like these lifestyle choices, because it becomes a part. We become intricately interconnected with all the decisions that we've made over the years, and it's a complete upheaval perhaps for some people to start thinking into a new way of living, and it may be scary for people. Well, this makes a lot of sense, and I for one have never really thought about it in that fashion before, about this difference between testosterone specifically and the female sex hormones, that testosterone is somehow mysteriously activating and building at the same time, whereas the feminine sex hormones are not. They are building, but restful.
The feminine hormones are building. They build uterine linings and babies, and they're really building. And testosterone mostly is just this very Langana, very yang force. It's just at extremes, it builds mass. But when you can't just take testosterone and it'll build mass, you have to work out to trigger that. So it's sort of, it needs that push to push it over into the extreme. And so it's really it's an interesting mix. You know, John, do you find that that people are, since you work so much with digestion, do you find that people reach this kind of wall when they have worked on their diet for a long time and it might have improved things somewhat, but they're still having trouble?
Well, the funny thing is, Claudia, is that many of my clients who come to me have already tried really hard to get their diet right. They visited Joyful Belly, they researched all the ingredients, they know their Ayurvedic properties, and you know, nothing's working for them, and oftentimes they're just even trying too hard to get, you know, trying too hard to get their diet right, trying too hard to get their life right, and really I find myself more often than anything just counseling people to just take it easy, don't worry. The rules are important. Pay attention to your body as well, not just the rules. What is your, you know, and coaching clients through, you know, through their, through an inner experience, so that they get to understand their bodies in this process of following rules about their diet. And so, even though my practice doesn't specifically focus on stress management, the parts of the glimpse into that I do see quite so often is that people are pushing instead of kind of relaxing into it. As you said, they're maybe just a little out of touch, and in their heads with it instead of their bodies. I would also agree with you that that a perfect diet is not the only answer. It's just a piece to the puzzle, for sure. For sure, they have to somehow deal with this stress. And in our in the workshops that we've held on weight loss in particular, 9 times out of 10, the client that is coming in worrying about their weight, who may be actually obese, the cause of that is stress, nearly every time. That it's not that couch potato stereotype. I don't know where that stereotype started. If it started in like the early 80s or something, when, you know, I have no idea when couch potato became a stereotype. But I would say almost none of our clients fit that stereotype who come to us looking for weight loss in particular. It's always that they're so overstressed that that they're coming up against these issues in their bodies. Yeah.
So you want to look for a minute at why that's one way of looking at why that's happening?
Let's hear it. Sure. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm sure you have plenty of ways of looking at that too. Yeah. But so what we see, you know, in a real nutshell, we could talk about this for 12 hours, right? Mm-hmm. But in a real nutshell, we've got these sex hormones for women. I'm talking sex hormones that are building and nourishing and calming. We've got stress hormones that are motivating and stimulating and kind of hot and lightening. And if they're lightening and we're so stressed out and they lighten and dry the body, then why are we gaining weight sometimes? A lot of women are losing weight, but a lot of women then end up kind of gaining weight too. And there's a couple reasons for this. And by the way, let me give a little illustration to what I mean by lightening, right? These and a little background on this, on stress hormones and their anabolic effect on the body. They really are deleterious over long term to the tissues in the body. They break down the tissues of the body. They lighten the body. There's this special forces school in South Carolina or North Carolina. I can't remember where it was, but it's a place where cadets go for incredible stress training. So they do things like, and this is one of the things they do, tie the cadets' hands and feet together and throw them in a pool that's deeper than them, and they have to figure out how to survive. And by the way, how you do it is you allow your body to go limp and you relax and you hit the bottom of the pool and you hit off so that you can go up to the top, and you get your nose up there and you take a breath and you go down and you hit and you push off the bottom and you go up, because your hands and feet are tied. You can't swim, right? So you have to figure that out. You have to be aware enough to figure that out. And some of them don't figure that out and they almost die before they're pulled out of the pool. So it's this real life or deathy, high stress situation, and their cortisol levels are through the roof. Guess how many pounds they lose on average in, I think it's 3 days.
You know, I have no idea. What is the number of pounds?
22 pounds. So some less and some more, but they lose 22 pounds in a few days. This is the effect, the highly lungana, the highly lightening, reducing, as they call it in Ayurveda, effect of stress hormones. So why is stress making us heavy, right? Because when stress is high for too long, and we've been irrigating our system for too long with this cortisol and adrenaline that we talked about before, and that's staying in our system for too long, that ends up wearing down the endocrine system. And it does so, all else being equal, and I'll say what I mean about that in a minute, but all else being equal, it will first affect the adrenals, then it will affect the insulin-producing portion of the pancreas, and then it'll affect the thyroid, and then the ovaries and other things. But let's look at that for a minute. How do you know that your adrenals are affected? You know, adrenal exhaustion. My preferred method is just that you're tired. You're tired in a bone-deep kind of way, and if that's happening, most likely your adrenals are tired, and you probably don't need to go get it checked. If you're tired all the time and you are sleeping, but you're tired all the time, your adrenals are probably tired. The insulin-producing portion of the pancreas answers our question about why we have trouble losing weight if we're stressed out, and the stress is such a stimulating, motivating, lightening force in the body. And it's because that insulin-producing portion of the pancreas, when that gets hit, then you start getting weight gain around the middle. It's the weight gain around the middle thing that is, if we were talking about this in Ayurveda, we would have to say that's Vata pushing Kapha. And so with that weight gain around the middle, we have exactly the wrong impulse to treat that often. Often we'll say, oh, that's high Kapha. You have extra weight around the middle. You have high Kapha. You should be running and jumping and doing jumping jacks and sweating your brains out every day, and, you know, Jane Fonda, jump around, make it burn. You should be out there being super active, which is precisely what got you in the problem to begin with, because you're so active that you're not getting any of that nourishment, and those stress hormones go up. You're overstimulated for too long, and so those people, when they go out and they try to like eat less and work more, they're worsening the problem. I have a friend who was co-teaching with me, and she studied with me a lot, and she is a very, very driven woman, and we got together, and she likes to, you know, run marathons and do this kind of stuff. And we got together and she said, oh, I've got this weight gain around my middle, and I want to, and I mean, I could barely see it, you know, I'd need a microscope for it, right? But you could sort of see, okay, a little extra weight around the middle. And she said, and it was really bothering her. And she's like, so I want to go out and run more this weekend. And I said, you've studied with me. Stop doing that. You need pudding. You know, you need some avocados and some rice pudding. You have got to stop this. And she's like, I know, I've heard you, but I don't believe you. I'm like, all right, well, we're together for a week. How about you don't run, you can't do any strenuous exercise, you can do a little restorative yoga, you can take a walk, and that's it. And you have to eat pudding. I will buy you pudding, and I will buy you avocados, and you have to do this, and then see how you feel at the end of the week. And by the end of the week, even just the end of the week, her midsection weight was reduced, and she finally really believed me on a different level. Did she stop being driven? No, because it takes most of us like a life or death kind of experience to stop, even when we understand on sort of a theoretical level what the problem is. We don't believe it. We still believe we need to be Jane Fonda, and it's the problem. So first the adrenals, then the insulin-producing portion of the pancreas. That gives this extra weight gain. Then we get into the thyroid, and the thyroid issue, that answers the why is there an epidemic of thyroid issues for women, and that you cannot have the stress response, I 100% believe this, go on and on and on and on the way we do, and not have the endocrine system taxed in this manner. All else being equal, adrenals, insulin-producing portion of the pancreas, and then the thyroid. So then we get the thyroid involved. And whether it's hypo or hyper, to me, is usually the same root. I often treat them that have treated them the same way and gotten excellent results in both cases, because I think it's very rare to have a true hypothyroid situation. What's mostly happened is it's become hyper-stimulated, hyper demands put on it for so long that it burns out, and then it crashes, and then there's hypothyroid. But the root cause is the same, this pushing and excessive drive and excess stress for too long. Eventually, first it's hyper, and then it crashes and it's hypo. So the treatment plan for both is usually very similar in my experience.
And you're saying that treatment is, again, just to relax and take it easy. And now I've seen a lot of folks who externally they don't appear that active, but if you have a conversation with them, their cortisol levels are still through the roof, right? You've seen this kind of scenario. Actually, a lot of moms I've talked to have this issue where they may be taking care of kids, a little bit of running around in the afternoon or in the morning, but are otherwise, you know, kind of not really pushing themselves that much, but are still experiencing these same symptoms. And most of the times in those cases, what I've noticed is that stress is really internally generated for them, that their life is totally overwhelming to them on some level. And so if you could maybe speak a little bit to that, what's going on in that case, because these clients of mine are naturally active people, but are almost frozen into, in a way, almost into inactivity by the stress and overwhelming, you know, overwhelming task of whether it's child raising, or I'm not exactly sure what is creating that sense of overwhelm for them. What is your thoughts on that?
Oh, this is a beautiful question, and it does allow me to go back and refine what I mean by active. I don't mean that you're out running all the time necessarily, for sure. It's just this overactive worry and sense that we're never getting where we should get, and we're never getting everything done, and I think that so that's precisely it. It doesn't necessarily mean physically active. It could mean physically active. It could mean like going from here to there and soccer mom and trying to fit in the work and trying to fit in a hobby and trying to fit in yoga and trying to fit in eating, trying to fit in all of these things, and it's all becomes this to-do list that never gets done, and there's this background stress with that, and this sense of being in overwhelm and being trapped in a life we don't want to be living is the underlying core. It's like we always want to see, even if we have to treat the branch, what's the root? And if we say the root is stress, that explains things to a point, but what's the root of the stress? And if you say, well, the root of the stress is you're doing too much, well, why are you doing too much? What's the root of that root? What's that cause? Well, you're doing too much because it's habit. Well, why is that habit? Well, it's been a habit because I really believe that my kid should have soccer and have this and have that and have this and have that. And, well, what's the root of that? If we go back to the root of the root of the root, the cause of the cause of the cause, why are we stressed? And the stress is the lifestyle. And why are we choosing this? And it comes down, in a sense, to choice. And I think, and I say that, but ultimately I think it's useful to come to a place in life where we're not making choices. So let me explain this a little bit. If I'm going to take this down to a really like simple thing, Josephine invites me to dinner, and I have to say yes or no. So I think, shall I go to dinner with Josephine? And there's a little thing we can do. We can say, what are my seductions in this, and what are my fears? Out to dinner with Josephine, she's the teacher of my kid, and maybe she'll give more attention to my kid, or she knows the boss, and maybe if she put in a good word, then I'll go up the ladder a little bit more, or she has a cute brother or a cute sister and I'm interested in them. And there's all these little seductions that are kind of in the background, but they end up making our choices for us so often. And then we say yes, when actually we don't really want to go out to dinner with Josephine. Right, so that's on one side. And the other side, there's the fears, and they're often the flip side of the seduction. So we think, if I don't go out to dinner with Josephine, she's my kid's teacher, and she'll think I'm snubbing her, and then she'll be more rotten to my kid than she already is. And if I don't go out with her, she's the the boss's daughter, and she's gonna put in a bad word for me. And there's all this flip side kind of stuff. And I think fears and seductions often have to do with love, like kind of romantic love, or power or money. Those three things often are our seductive motivations or our underlying fears. And these things we end up defaulting to these, somebody I know calls them a four-letter word beginning with S. We'll call them poop fairies, right? They call them these nasty little fairies in the head that on one hand is these seductive voices, and on the other hand these fear voices. And over and over and over, they end up making the choices. And we end up with this out of integrity life where I'm doing this because I'll get more ahead in that way, or my kid will, or my husband will, or my partner will, or my dog will, or whatever is motivating us in terms of our idea of success. And we are possessed, I think, by some kind of idea. We have become possessed by some kind of idea of what a successful life looks like and means, and our role in that. And it's been governed so often by these little fairies in the background, these nasty little fairies. And I think we have an option to change how we deal with that moment. And I think the option is to, should I go out to dinner with Josephine? I kind of go in and I check with my little voice, or my inner clarity, or however we want to call that. And what happens with that? There's either a yes, that's the right thing to do, that's what I want to do, or there's a no, don't want to go out, it's not the right thing, or there's nothing, we don't hear a voice. And so if it's yes or no, if it's nothing, what's happening? One possibility is we're not used to listening inside, we don't know how to do that. So then we need to practice that. Another possibility is that there's no answer yet, it's not clear. And that means, I had a teacher who used to say, when in doubt, do nothing. And so if there's nothing, to put off that decision until there's a clear yes or no. And I have found this to be one of the most incredible tools in my life, to listen inside. And so then what we've got is a yes, no, or nothing. So then we've got the corresponding actions are go to dinner, don't go to dinner, or wait and do nothing and put off the decision.
Yeah, well, how is that possible in a yang culture, right? In a yang culture, it's got to be yes or no, right? But you're introducing a third response here, which is nothing, which is incredibly, painful for people to be in that state of uncertainty, right? So it's a little bit of a difficult spot there.
So what remains is, sometimes it's hard to say yes, sometimes it's hard to say no, and sometimes it's hard to do nothing. Any one of those three things can require courage to do.
Yeah.
So that's where this inner courage to live in our own integrity comes from, is from inside, and we have to have that courage. Now, we often in this culture think of courage as the courage to do something, to go out and be a warrior. But often courage is to do nothing and to say no, or to do nothing and put off the decision, such as it is. And then in that sense, if you're just cooperating with that inner voice, you're never making a decision, you're never making a choice, you're simply cooperating with your inner voice. That's it. And then things fall where they may. This idea of courage to do nothing or to wait is exemplified so beautifully in the movie Lincoln. If you haven't seen that movie Lincoln, go see it. It's whether or not, and I've been told it's a fairly an accurate portrayal of Lincoln, but whether or not it is accurate historically, and again, I've been told it is, but whether or not it is, it's a beautiful illustration of a man who is comfortable doing nothing, and with that courage to do nothing when nothing is called for. There's this whole situation where there's the leaders of the opposition are coming to meet him, and they want a yes or a no answer to something, and everybody's pushing him to give a yes or a no answer, and he's not, and he's not, and he's not. And it's like the courage it takes to not do something at that point is phenomenal. And finally, when he sits down at the telegraph machine to send them a yes or no, he has this wonderful little conversation that I don't totally remember with a couple people around him, but I kind of felt like he was like getting an omen from them or something. But he has this conversation, and then what does he do? He still doesn't say yes or no. At that point, he writes to them and he says, "Come this far and wait for a response." He puts it off even longer. And that was this incredibly courageous move. And that, I think, takes courage to, when in doubt, do nothing, and have this practice every day of looking in. This is what meditation is about. This is what internal visualization is about. This is what cultivating a relationship with our own prana, why this is useful. All of these things are useful because we start to develop a relationship inside and be able to hear that. And I think that when we hear that, we've been trapped in this life that we're uncomfortable in, that we don't want to be in, we're overwhelmed. If we start little by little living our lives in that kind of integrity, as the Bhagavad Gita talks about, a couple places in the Bhagavad Gita talks about the importance of living in our own dharma, in our own integrity, and it says, even if we die doing that, it's better than living in someone else's. And in another place it says, if we try to live in someone else's dharma, then that breeds fear and insecurity. And what does that mean, really? It means, like, if I'm trying to live somebody else's idea of success, or what somebody else thinks I ought to do, and I'm not really living in that moment in integrity, then my life starts piling up on unreal things that don't mean anything to me. That's a stressful context in which to live, even if it doesn't look stressful. It could look perfect. You have the perfect house and the perfect kids and the perfect dog and the perfect job, but it's all meaningless, and that is an immensely stressful place to be. And there's an amazing amount of hope in terms of being able to get out of that. And it's just scary. We think it's all going to fall apart if we start living in integrity and saying no to things that we want to say no to, and saying yes to things that we want to say yes to, and really start living the lives we really want to be living. When we do that, we feel like, oh gosh, it's so scary and everything will fall apart. And I hold out the possibility for anybody that will happen, that life will fall apart. But I've never seen it with thousands and thousands of people. I've never seen that. What I've seen happen is that people's lives get sweeter and sweeter and sweeter. And the only things that fall apart are the things that we don't like anyway. And so it's worth that, because I don't believe we really can have digestive health without having living integrity, because we end up creating a stressful context in which we're living our lives that ends up encouraging the release and stimulation of adrenaline and cortisol over and over and over. That ends up irrigating our tissues and our organs, robbing the digestive organs of the resources they need in order to be in order to give us healthy digestion and healthy results of digestion, we start living in our extremities and not even remembering how to live in our core and our core values and in our vital organs. So I think that it kind of goes down to that moment of integrity over and over and over. Again, of course, you got to eat whole foods and freshly cooked foods, and you can't get there on pizza and donuts. But but as long as you're eating whole foods and you're in the ballpark of healthy diet, this is important. This is important stuff.
Yeah, this issue of discernment, making choices, is a core spiritual question that every world or religion or system of philosophy or spirituality has tried to really come to terms with and really tried to answer. And so you're hitting at what is the when we start talking about diet and then discover that stress is playing such a significant role, and then from that we discover that you can't really solve stress until we solve some of these core spiritual issues. You're directly speaking to the or calling people even to understand that this issue of stress, in fact, may have a spiritual origin for many people. That it's not just a biological origin, that their hormones are out of balance, but a spiritual issue that's causing them to become out of balance. You've said several things, trapped in a life that we don't want to be living, and that itself is also a core spiritual issue that many people are in crisis about, and it brings them right to their knees. It brings them right to their knees of like, how am I going to live my life? How am I going to navigate that? And I think different systems have different answers to that question. But one thing is for sure, that we do need to answer that question. We do need to seek the answer to that question, and therefore we will find ourselves on a pilgrimage at that point to get there. I don't want to take up too much of your time today, Claudia. You said that you've got to leave at around noon, so I want to wrap this up and say again that I've learned a lot just through this interview today, and I do this for a living. So I think that many of our of the listeners who are gonna listen to this video will get immense learn immense things from what you've said. And I really want to say again, I appreciate so much your sharing with our users all of your wisdom in the area of hormones and all of your life experience as well. It was valuable to have you as a teacher when I was a student of Ayurveda. It's still very valuable to reconnect with you as a practitioner. So thanks again, Claudia.
Such a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me and for doing all your good work, and everybody listening for doing all your good work. We can all help each other. We all have the ability to act as medicine or poison or neutral to each other. And if we can have this integrity in our own lives and make those efforts, and we see that in each other, then we're acting as medicine for each other, and that can be pretty powerful.
Yes.
So
yes, it is.
It is. Digestion, as well as so many other things, is a spiritual issue and is an ethical issue, and that moment-to-moment commitment to it, which is not easy, and I fail over and over and over, but we also can succeed over and over and over in many of the minutes, and it's very, very hopeful situation. So thanks for having me here, and all the best to everybody.
Oh, you're very welcome. One more quick question.
Yeah.
How should people get in touch with you or reach out to you if they would like a consultation with you, or to get your books? Or, what is the best way for them to connect?
Well, I'm not doing personal consultations anymore, but I have a lot of courses. There's a Healthier Hormones online course that I have, goes into a lot of this for women if they want to get more into the women's health aspect of things. This is, and I've got this book, How the Art of Medicine Makes the Science More Effective, is ostensibly for practitioners, but since it's a new book that I just put out, I'm really fond of it, and I feel like it's good for everybody because it does touch on how we can support each other and how we can be medicine for each other. And then there's the Balance Your Hormones, Balance Your Life book, which I wish every woman would read, and not just to be all self-promoting about it. I just dearly wish everybody could have that information.
No, we'll affirm that. We wish all women would read it as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So all of these things you can browse on my website, which is www.drclaudiawelch.com, Welch like the grape juice, W-E-L-C-H, no S. And go browse and come visit and love to see you there, connect.
Sounds great. Sounds great. Thank you again.
Thank you, John. Take care.
Take care.